In the previous sessions, we learned that the member functions from the base classes automatically inherited from the derived classes. How about the constructor? Does constructor also inherited from the base class? Let's talk about it. There are some specialized member functions, such as constructor, that are not automatically inherited. So the base class constructors are not inherited in the derived classes. But you can invoke the base classes constructor from the derived classes. In fact, you must initialize the inherited member variables by calling base classes constructor. So a constructor for a derived class begin with an invocations of a constructor for the base class. So the first thing derived class constructor does is invoking the base classes constructor. This is the example of calling base class constructor. As we defined in the previous sessions, employee is a base class, and hourly employee is the derived class which inherits the employee class. And this is the constructor for hourly employee class. The first thing this constructor does is calling base class constructor to initialize the inherited member variables. And this is how you invoke the base classes constructor. We learned that this is the initialization sections. By putting the name of the base class in past relevant argument, you can invoke the base class constructor. Note that the syntax for invoking the base class constructor is analog to the syntax used to set member variables. This one and this one sets the member variables defined in the hourly employee. So this one sets the value of member variable wage rate with the value of the wage rate argument. So syntax for calling a base class constructor and initializing member variable in the initialize sections are very similar. And you must aware that initializing the base class members in initializing section is not allowed. So you cannot directly initialize inherited member variable like this way. You have to call the base class constructor to initialize them. You should always invoke one of the base classes constructor from the derived classes. If you do not invoke a constructor for the base class from the derived class constructor, the default constructor, which does not receive any arguments, the default constructor of the base class will be invoked automatically. So these two versions of the constructor from our employee is equivalent. Here we explicitly invoke the default constructor of employee class. Because there is no argument, we are calling the default constructor for the employee class. Here, because we did not call any constructors of base class, the default constructor of base class is invoked automatically. So these two are equivalent in terms of that the default constructor for employee class is invoked. However, we prefer to explicitly include a call to a base class constructor like this one, even if it would be invoked automatically by C++ compiler if you do not explicitly call it. By explicitly include a call to a base class constructor, it improves the readability of your program. The destructor is not also inherited. But when the derived class is destructed, the base class's destructor is automatically invoked. So you do not need to explicitly call it. This means that all you need to concern with newly defined members of derived classes. The inherited member variables will be automatically handled by the base class's destructor. The order of calling constructor and destructor is different. Assume that there is some inheritance relationship like this one. Assume that class B inherit class A and class C inherit class B. So A is the parent class of B and B is the child class of A. Similarly, C is the child class of B and B is the parent class of C. So there is a relationship between these three classes. Then in which order the constructor and destructor of base and derived classes are called? As I explained in the previous slide, the first action taken by a derived class constructor is calling the base class's constructor. So when an object of C is created, first a constructor for A is called, then for constructor B, and finally class C constructor is invoked. So simply you can think that the base class constructor is invoked first, and then the constructor from derived class is invoked. So the order of calling constructor in this inheritance relationship is this one. A first, B next, and C the last one. The order of calling destructor is just opposite. The derived class's destructor is invoked first, and then the base class destructor is invoked. So for the inheritance relationship, this one, the destructor of class C is invoked first, and then B's destructor is called, and finally A's constructor is invoked. So these are the orders of calling constructors and destructors from base class and the derived class. Now let's explore the order of calling constructor by using a demo code. So this is a demo code. There is a two class, person and student. Student is a derived class because it inherited person, and person is a base class. And as you can see here, person has a two constructor. This one is a default constructor because it does not receive any arguments. And this constructor receives one string arguments, and using these arguments to set the member variable name. Student class has a three constructor. This one is default constructor because it does not receive any arguments. The first thing this constructor does is invoking the default constructor of the person's class, which is a base class, and set SID member variable with 0. And this one receive one int types of arguments, and using these arguments to set this SID value. And this one also calls the default constructor for base class. And this constructor receives two arguments, one string types of argument and one int type of arguments. And it calls the base class constructor, which receive one string types of argument, so this one, and set the SID with the second argument value. And in the main function, we create three objects of student class types. This one will obviously invoke this default constructor of students class. And this one will invoke this constructor because it receives one int arguments. And this object will be created by calling this third constructor because it passes two arguments, string and int types of arguments. So let's compile this program and run it. This is the output of this program. First of all, this two line is printed because of this one line. The person default constructor is called because of this one. Here it prints this line. And then student default constructor is called because of this one. So the order is that base class constructor is called first, and then the derived class constructor is invoked. Similarly, this two line is printed because of this line. The base class constructor is called first. This one is called. This one is called because of this one. And then the student's int constructor is called. This one is because of this one. And same for this one. The base class constructor, this one is called first because of this. And then the derived classes constructor is invoked. Okay, that's it for these sessions. In the following session, we will learn more about the inherited concepts such as protected modifiers and multiple inheritance. So see you in the following sessions.